The daughter is 49, still too young to go to the next world. She would have lived longer. But what can you do? Her heart couldn't stand it. A lot of worries, after all, your own business. She was worried about her income, about the people who work for her. This is how you work like hell. So that later you can have a rest, and then it doesn't come, and you think that it's better to live modestly, but for a long time, or just like her daughter. Natalia Igorevna wiped away her tears and got to work. You need to finish it quickly so that you don't have to go home on a crowded bus in the heat of the day. But she didn't wave the hoe for long. Soon she had to pause. She heard a strange noise and froze, trying to determine where it was coming from. It seemed to her that it came from underground. I sat down and almost crawled to examine the area inside the fence and realized that it was some kind of hum coming from the fence pipe. Even barely audible words could be heard. The elderly woman looked at the sun. It didn't seem to bother her too much that such hallucinations could have happened. It couldn't have happened from the experience either. In the first days, she felt very bad. Then she prayed and decided that she needed to live for her grandchildren. The youngest daughter has children. Now, of course, she is still worried about Irochka's death, but she is not going crazy. She has pulled herself together. Therefore, now it is not clear why all sorts of things are imagining. Just in case, she crossed herself and clung to the pipe again, listened, and realized that she really was hearing something from underground. This couldn't have happened, but some words could be discerned. Natalia Igorevna could have sworn that she heard, "Help, I'm alive." Realizing that it could be her daughter, she ran to the old woman for help. There, the out-of-breath grandmother turned to two watchmen and asked them to urgently dig up her daughter's grave. The men looked at each other and told the granny not to be foolish, but to drink a sedative. They thought that the grandmother had gone mad in her old age. "Listen for yourself," Natalia Igorevna said excitedly. "I'm telling you, there's a living person asking for help." "When was your daughter buried?" one of the men asked. When the elderly woman named the date, he patted her on the shoulder with sympathy and said that it was better for her to go home and rest. "Mother, a person cannot survive so many days underground," he convinced her. "You'd better go to church." But Natalia Igorevna did not give up and proved that she heard the voice. But the watchman tried more and more persistently to get rid of the deranged grandmother. Then she took out the money and offered to fulfill her request for a reward. Even 2,000 did not convince the men to take shovels and dig up the grave. "Okay, even if it's not my daughter," Natalia Igorevna said decisively. "But what if someone was planted at her grave later?" And the elderly woman took out 5,000. The men looked at each other, shrugged their shoulders. They say, "Any whim for your money," and agreed to check. They thought that they would drip, see what was the source of the noise, and the grandmother would calm down, and they would earn some money. But the surviving dead and foundlings did not believe it. Arriving at the grave, the first thing the guards did was listen. As they assumed there was no noise, the grandmother made it all up, but when Natalia Igorevna knocked on the pipe, a rumble was actually heard from under the ground. But you never know. Some animal, insects, or a cavity in the earth has formed, which is why the air passing through the pipe gives such an effect. They didn't think there was a living person there, but when they started digging, they were shocked. A small tunnel led to the pipe, from the grave of the grandmother's daughter. As a result, the watchman unearthed a coffin in which lay a half-dead woman. By some miracle, she managed to survive. As Irina later said, she came to her senses in a coffin, screaming, trying to get out. She realized that she had already been buried. She managed to punch a hole in the lid of the coffin, and she began to dig up the ground. Having dug about 1/2 meter, she rested her head on a hollow pipe from the fence. This provided access to oxygen and minimal moisture. After that, she had the opportunity to rest a little and start digging with renewed vigor. But there was no way to get further. Higher up, the soil consisted of large stones. The watchman admitted that the gravedigger sometimes has to fill the graves with stones. The neighboring area is leveled and brought from there to be disposed of. Irina, having stumbled upon the stones, despaired and thought that she would die here buried alive. But today she heard that there was someone at the grave and began screaming into the trumpet. Luckily, it turned out to be her mother. A stranger would hardly have listened and insisted that the grave be dug up. Irina was taken to the hospital, where she was diagnosed with pneumonia and dehydration. No one could believe that she spent 11 days in the grave. The woman survived only thanks to the fence that her husband carefully installed. Only when her daughter's health was no longer in danger and she was safe did her mother come to her senses that in her haste she didn't have time to tell anyone that Irina had been resurrected. But she could be understood. Fuss began. An ambulance and the police arrived. They started asking questions. And then, when the elderly woman came to her senses and realized that she needed to tell her son-in-law this good news, she was stopped by law enforcement officers in the interests of the investigation. They asked her not to tell anyone about the miraculous salvation. It turned out that traces of a toxic substance were found in Irina's blood, and it was clear how it happened that there was no autopsy, and death was attributed to the heart. Someone deliberately falsified the certificates. That is, there was a bribe involved. They brought up the death certificate, and it meant that there had been a cover-up. Everything was confirmed by a medical report. In order not to frighten off the criminal, Irina remained officially dead for now. Natalia Igorevna was bursting with the joyful news that her daughter was alive, but it was in her own interest to remain silent. And literally that same evening, her son-in-law came to her with a snack. Knowing that his second daughter lived in another city, he wanted to brighten up the loneliness of the elderly woman. He still grieved that he had not saved his wife. He should have protected her from managing the business and given her more rest. The mother-in-law just wanted to feel sorry for the man, to say that now he would have the opportunity to take care of his wife, but she restrained herself. She also made a sad face and began to grieve with him, and then her son-in-law became worried about her, saying that you should also take care of yourself, not take the business on your shoulders. It's enough that your daughter could not withstand such a load. At your age you need even more rest, he said. And then Natalia Igorevna got angry that it was he who called her an old woman or something. And then she became wary of how smart he was. He recently buried his wife and was already worrying about her business. The mother-in-law suspected something was wrong. It was not without reason that she was worried about her wife's business, and Natalia Igorevna herself did not have a trusting relationship with her son-in-law. Everyone communicated through Irina. All this is strange. I decided that I needed to be on guard with him, and so my son-in-law offered to drink for his repose, poured out the funeral cognac, laid out an appetizer, which he apparently took from the restaurant, and the mother-in-law is looking closely at him, thinking I will eat and drink only after him. As soon as she took the glass, the guest hit himself on the forehead and began to lament. "What a fool! I forgot the lemon," he said. "I'm already used to drinking only with lemon." "Do you happen to have one?" he asked. But I knew that my mother-in-law liked to drink tea with lemon, so she probably had lemon at home. Of course, of course. Natalia Igorevna jumped up and ran to the kitchen, and she was almost sure that her son-in-law was up to something. She began to watch him through the doorway, and was not mistaken. The man hurried to take something out of his pocket, and looking back at the door, quickly poured it into her glass. He came up with everything so cleverly that his mother-in-law would never have guessed. He figured out all the little things except one. I chose the wrong fence. Now it became clear to the elderly woman for whom the second place in the cemetery was fenced off. It wasn't the son-in-law who wanted to lie next to his beloved wife, but he prepared everything for the mother-in-law.